Homie the Clown is an aggressively absurd episode, and that's why I love it. Now, this isn't one of those where the situation itself is super absurd and the characters deal with it in a fairly logical way. It's the opposite, where it's a pretty down-to-earth concept that none of the characters can seem to deal with. Basically, all the major characters make one mistake after another, where at some point you start to wonder if they're too stupid to live. This is one of those episodes that really goes over the top with its characterizations. When a character is bad with money, he's really bad with money. When a character is impressionable, he's really impressionable. When a character is Dick Cavett, he's really Dick Cavett. If you want a subtle portrayal of Krusty the Clown, you're looking in the wrong place. This is Krusty at his biggest, most dynamic self. He's entertaining and he takes his clowning at least somewhat seriously. Sure, he steals a few jokes here and there, but the kids love him, the mafia loves him, and he's knowledgeable and experienced enough to teach a clown college. That's pretty good by Krusty standards. We get that cynical side of his personality too, this time hammering home how stupid he is with money. I think this is a good approach for a Season 6 Krusty episode. Like Father Like Clown tackled how unhappy he is. Camp Krusty examined his cheap merchandising business. Homie the Clown touches on these aspects a little, but stakes its own claim in the world of gambling and wasteful spending. I like this progression of Krusty constantly burning stuff, like the writers are testing the limits of how ridiculous they can push this concept. You would think it would be over by the Action Comics #1 bit, but really? Lighting up a pearl necklace? This feels like a very Schwartzwalder-y joke. I don't know if all the gambling jokes land. Like, Krusty betting on the opera is more absurd weird than absurd funny, but I can't argue with a series of jokes that leads to the Harlem Globetrotters. Krusty's reaction is so great. Makes this scene like 10 times better than it probably should have been. He was using a freaking ladder! Now, Krusty's storyline is hilarious because of just how over the top it is. But when it comes to Homer, I feel like the absurdity is more in the why of it. Homer's role is structured almost like a hypnosis episode, where he goes through all this stuff, all this ambition and adversity, but there isn't any functional reason for him to do any of it. Homer clearly doesn't seem to be enjoying working as a clown. It's not like he's trying to pay for Lisa's pony or something too. Why doesn't he just quit? He's sorta going through the motions because of this magical billboard and how it seems to infest his brain with this desire. Now, I'm not necessarily criticizing this aspect of the episode. Like I said, the absurdity of the situation is funny. It's just, this is one of those storylines where you have to turn off the part of your brain questioning why. Homer's magnetic draw toward clowning is exceptionally well portrayed. The silly music, the quick and repetitive motions, Lenny's gotta be thinking Homer's lost his mind at this point. Then we go to a more sinister Close Encounters parody and some POV shots of the family. Love how the backgrounds start moving slowly, really amping up Homer's mania. Homer and Krusty actually don't spend that much time together in the episode, and it's honestly for the better. I think if we stuck to just one of these story concepts any longer, the absurdity would start to burn itself out. The wastefulness would run itself into the ground. Homer's clowning would start to feel purposeless. They do a nice job separating and combining these stories so that we get those individual flavors, but the overall plot has just enough direction and structure that we can follow it. Opening the episode with Krusty's tiny bicycle trick is exceptionally clever. The writers know it will play a huge role in the climax, so they insert it into Act 2 as a minor obstacle for Homer. It's cool how they don't overplay their hand here and make this some big thing that haunts him. They just re-establish it, do 3 little jokes, and save the rest for the end. This episode would be so much more incoherent if they didn't have this constant element tying everything together. The actual motivations of Homer's clowning is a bit nonsensical, but to their credit, we do get some character progression with him. Act 2 never feels stale or anything. Partially because all these scenes are frickin' hilarious, but also that they hit up a pretty diverse set of clowning drudgery. We get a promotional moment for kids in the community, we get a private party for people Homer already knows, we get a celebrity appearance for adults. Homer talks about the kids getting ready to jab him with something, but we don't really need to see a bunch of kids' parties in a row. They give us the bullet points of Homer's jobs, and then move on to something else. I do think Dick Cavett was a real good sport for doing this role, though, where he's basically the last annoying thing Homer has to deal with during this section. It's an incredibly mean guest spot, and Dick Cavett pulls it off like a champ. Also, I gotta sing the praises of the Krusty burglar scene. Especially this moment. It's just so quotable, so memeable, so applicable to different situations. You can tell the writers were probably a little concerned about Homer just straight up killing a man, so they were probably wise to put this in at the end. I suspect if this were produced in season 10, they just kill this guy. I like the balance of going for this dark joke, but putting some restraint on how far they'll take Homer. Although as I say that, I realize how weird that argument is, that this is the writers showing some restraint with Homer as a character. We've come a long way since season 1. There is something beautiful and classic about how it touches on the Homer-Krusty connection as part of the series' conception. That Krusty was designed that way because he was originally supposed to be Homer in disguise. The irony of Bart disrespecting his father, but looking up to this clown. They obviously abandoned this, but it's neat how this episode takes advantage of that bit of Simpsons lore. I suppose it was inevitable that they address this at some point. At the beginning of the review, I talked about how incredibly stupid Homer and Krusty are portrayed. But you gotta throw Springfield into that bucket too. It's kinda crazy that no one in this town can seem to figure out this actually isn't Krusty the Clown, with Homer not changing his voice or anything. Apu's just like, here's your gigantic asses, and doesn't question it. You could have had a character like Marge comment that it should be obvious it's Homer, like in the Pie Man episode. But I like that this one commits 100% to the nonsense, sticks with what they started. Flanders is like the only character who actually shows any self-awareness of the plot going on around it. I think I'll go inside. Fat Tony's crew really leans into this ridiculous atmosphere too. We get a much more exaggerated version of them. We've gone from them betting on horses and stealing cigarettes in season 3, to taking bets on opera and Harlem Globetrotters games. We've gone from them not actually attacking Principal Skinner, to actively trying to kill Krusty the Clown. I think this plot desperately needed some conflict in it. The writers were smart to ramp up how threatening they can be. But they were also wise to highlight how gullible and bad at their jobs they actually are. They are certainly more cartoony bad guys in this one, but hey, this is a pretty cartoony episode. Legs gets the honor of delivering my favorite joke of the episode. I love everything about it. The cliche, the quick delivery, the fact that they just move on and don't even acknowledge it. Just a perfectly executed screw the audience joke. I'm not the biggest fan of this Don Vittorio DiMaggio character though. He gets some good lines, like the Italian stereotype thing. He's a threatening enough figure as well. He just feels a little superfluous. I honestly think the goons taking Homer to Fat Tony would have achieved the same thing. I guess they wanted Fat Tony to be more active in the field and did it this way instead. It's just weird what a random nobody Don Vittorio is, in the grand scheme of things. As mentioned earlier, the tiny bicycle trick works as a nice climax for the whole thing. It feels like the final number of a musical in some ways, where the individual characters have been doing their performances, and we get to see the two of them finally do it together, show off how dynamic they are as a team. Seeing Homer do the bicycle ring at the end always puts a smile on my face. The resolution of the conflict has always got to my nerves though. How this whole thing was over $48, which Krusty immediately pays. I can't tell if I'm being unreasonably nitpicky or grouchy about it. I like screw the audience jokes that sort of surprise me. I talked about the 4 Krusties and have praised Aronson and Zukowski before. I tend to furrow my brows more when these jokes tear down the plot, or suggest that everything was pointless the entire time. I get the joke, it just feels a little cheap. The debt was $48 the entire time. This is a pretty minor criticism though. Homie the Clown is still a very funny, very entertaining episode of The Simpsons. I guess the distinction I'd put on it is that it's a very Swartzweldery episode. This one supposedly didn't get edited much by the writer's room, so the final product was fairly close to his original script. I personally dig his sense of humor. I've read like 3 of his novels, so I enjoy this episode a lot. But I could see why others might not be as high on it. It's like a litmus test episode. Homie the Clown is successful because it takes some of that Swartzwelder logic, where people do things for vague, unexplained reasons, but attaches it to a fairly elegant, down-to-earth plot. It has enough structure and consistent enough goals that the sillier elements have something to rebel against. Basically, Homie the Clown should definitely not leave the clowning business to all the other clowns in the clowning business. Homie the Clown gets its clowning right.